Is we're going to be. Adrian, you're good? Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Scheurer.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. I've never taken a speaking engagement for granted, but this is nice to be back here in person, in real life again. I really like this. My talk here is called Lend Me Your IRs, which, as you might guess, is about incident response. So hopefully we're not tired of hearing about that, given the previous talk. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do. I'm at C3RKAH. I'm getting really close to 1,000 followers. Help me out, please. Follow me if you would. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn, and I don't have this branded slide deck, but I've got previous slide decks of this very same talk out on SlideShare. So, real quick introduction. My name is Matt Scheurer. I work for a big, well-known organization as an InfoSec engineer performing DFIR on a CCERT. I'm also a podcast host for the all-new Threat Real podcast. A little behind on the current episode, but I'll get it out there soon if you want to give us a listen. So just some quick things about me. Volunteer. I'm here up from the Cincinnati area, but I'm from about 70 miles south of here originally. So this is as close as I can get to a triumphant homecoming. And down in Cincinnati, I run a monthly InfoSec meetup group called the SIMPA Security SIG. And I'm also a Hacking is Not a Crime advocate. And I'm a technical mentor for WAMSA, which is the Women's Security Alliance. A quick disclaimer, I do have a day job, but opinions expressed are based solely on my own independent security research and don't express or reflect the views or opinions of my employer. Some objectives today are to show live demo reenactments from real attacks, explain how these attacks worked, how and why they defeated our security solutions, and then show incident responses to these attacks. And I'm going to demo investigation tools and techniques along the way, and discuss lessons learned and key takeaways. And just make sure everybody's on the same page. You probably already know this, but IOC is indicator of compromise. Sometimes people call it IOC. IR is incident response, and DFIR is digital forensics and incident response. Just some other disclaimers that these demos are all based on 100% true stories. I worked really hard to dutifully recreate the actual attacks, but the details have been altered. And then these investigations are sped up considerably in the amount of time for this presentation. And just sort of a reminder to folks, you should only use these techniques on a dedicated sandbox. And there's some great resources out there. SandSift Workstation was mentioned earlier, Remnux as well. They have some great tools within those. In my case, we're going to have to pretend I'm using a sandbox because I've built the demo environment on my local machine here. So my first scenario I am calling the mystery attachment. And this was really from a news headline that TrustWave researchers found a malware spam campaign targeting banks. And at the time, I was working for First Financial Bank in Cincinnati. What was unique about this is they were using Microsoft Publisher to launch their attacks. And it's very common to see other Microsoft Office documents like Word, Excel, PDFs, things like that. Very rare to see something leveraging Microsoft Publisher. It's not one of the more popular applications. But it was the flawed Amy Rat, which was part of the Nakurs botnet. And there's a link there to the original TrustWave blog that detailed this. But the following week, I had somebody that was a frantic visitor running up to my desk. And they were all worked up and basically telling me that one of the VIPs had opened up an attachment, and it was a Microsoft Publisher attachment, or at least they tried to open it, and then they realized, oops, I messed up, so they reached out. And this particular person, I want to say probably about half a year later, became my boss, and then about a year after that became my reason for leaving. That's another story. Buy me a beer, and we'll talk about that. So anyway, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, no problem. You'll get me the attachment and I'll dig into it. But as they stand there and they're just talking and they're just all worked up, now all of a sudden I'm starting to get anxious. I'm starting to get worked up. I'm like, all right, man, I'm going to do my best to turn the attachment. We don't actually have, where I'm working at the time, good mobile forensics tools of any sort. I'm probably not the best guy to do this, but I'm the most capable person within the organization to try to take a stab at it. So the investigation, we're going to open up the file in our pretend sandbox, and then we're going to talk about detonation research attempts, just failures to understand anything about it. I'll do a quick strings demo, and then we'll just show sort of hashing the file and doing online research. And then finally we'll look at EXIF data while I was pondering my next steps. So let's go ahead and do those things, and let me see if I can switch over here to files. So again, this would be opening up the file in my pretend sandbox. I don't actually have Microsoft Publisher here, so we're just going to use LibreOffice Draw. And like a lot of typical things that are going to lead to infection, it'll start off with a line. Let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger. Just sort of a quick blurb at the top, basically saying, hey, enable macros, here's how you do it. Because a lot of these malware samples that depend on macros, most of those things are disabled by default in security. So it's just a very vague looking document. There wasn't really anything in here as I'm looking at it in the sandbox. So let's go ahead and just take a look at strings. I like to run strings on files when I don't know exactly what I'm looking at, just to see if I can find something interesting in them. Let me open up a new terminal window. And let me make this bigger so it's hopefully a little easier to see. So we will go ahead and just do a SHA 256 sum. Now, it's important to note that it really just kind of depends on, oops, I forgot the word sum. It kind of depends on what tools you have in your environment and just knowing what they support, what the limitations might be. There are some organizations that use tools, and usually for the purpose of just doing a quick analysis, SHA or MD5 is fine. Obviously that can be defeated in a real situation with collisions and so forth. But for our purposes today, and what I had available at the time, we had everything. It had SHA 256, so I just went with that since it was a little more accurate. But you could do a MD5 sum and get the same results. So anyway, I went ahead and had that, and I just did some quick searching online just to see what I could find on that. And so, I just searched. Now, I didn't upload anything. I'm always very careful not to just upload things to VirusTotal, but if you have a hash value, you can absolutely search for it, and there's no harm in that. But to my surprise, there just really weren't any matches out there, and I'm thinking, well, if this is a now published threat, then usually you can find some value. When you search on a VirusTotal or something like that, if it's just generic plain Jane sent. Now, if it was something modified or targeted, then maybe your hash values aren't going to match. Jotty Malware Scan has a lot of the same scanners, but maybe a few different, and hash not found was the search result on there. And these tools I'm showing you absolutely support MD5, SHA 256, so it doesn't really matter which hashing algorithm you use. Even search on hybrid analysis to see, did somebody just upload this thing to that, and you can see no results were what I got. So then I got desperate, and I just started throwing the stuff on Google hash values, and sometimes you find things, sometimes you don't. In this case, I didn't. So now it's really got me thinking, like, what is this? Was this thing, somehow re-encoded? Was it specifically modified to target our organization and a specific user, particularly somebody that's considered a VIP that might have access to all sorts of sensitive information. So about this time, our own sandbox analysis completed, and I'm looking at it, and I can't find anything bad. Nothing I throw at this is telling me that this is anything bad. Even in the interactive sandbox, I'm trying to get the macro prompt, and I'm not that familiar with Publisher, but I couldn't figure it out. So at this point, I'm really scratching my head, and some of the thoughts I had are, what do we do about this? Do we say, well, this was tried to open up on an iPhone? Chances that you have malware written in Microsoft Publisher that can infect an iPhone, probably reasonably slim, but still, my risk tolerance is pretty low for that sort of thing, so I'm thinking that's not really a good option. The other thing is, well, maybe we just do a security wipe on the device, and maybe that would be sufficient, give us a little more peace of mind. I still wasn't comfortable with that option either. So while I'm looking in, this user was not due for a device refresh, but it was getting kind of close. I think we were maybe inside of 6 months. So I'm contemplating, well, maybe I should we should just confiscate the device, shut it down, get them a new one. And all these thoughts are running through my head. And I should add that, all of this stuff I'm digging into, that I'm looking at, I still can't make heads or tails sense of what's going on. So that's why I'm at this place where I'm trying to figure out, what do I recommend we do in this situation? So I finally had the idea that, this is the dumbest thing ever, but why didn't I look at the EXIF data for this? Now in Windows, it's pretty easy. You right-click on the file, you go into the properties from your Windows sandbox, and you look at that, properties, and see what you can find in there. See if there's anything useful. In Linux, the Perl EXIF tool is really good at this kind of stuff. So I went ahead and ran the EXIF tool on it, and just to kind of note some things here, the file name, directory, all that sort of stuff. But the file type, the file extension, and the MIME type were particularly interesting because I haven't ever seen really FPX that I can remember. So I did research and found out, yeah, that genuinely is what a Microsoft Publisher file looks like within the EXIF data, and tells me it's Microsoft Publisher, and I've got a version. Now, there was an author in here, and it didn't exactly say test fish, but it was pretty darn close, because what it was our test phishing vendor, and it led to that facepalm moment when you realize the email attachment you just spent 3 hours looking at actually came from your test phishing vendor. We'll talk about what went wrong here, but I didn't take that at face value because that stuff could be spoofed. And actually, I talked to a coworker friend, and we sort of debated on, hey, I wonder if a threat actor has used a test phishing vendor and embedded that into EXIF data or metadata to try to fool people. And lo and behold, that actually did happen. We actually did read about somebody doing that not that long after we just sort of talked about it. But I didn't trust what I saw, so I went back and I looked at the email headers, and they looked normal, although what I read was, yes, this really did come from your test phishing vendor's IP address. You're a moron. So what went wrong is I really got caught up in the moment by subconsciously letting somebody else influence my investigation. And their anxiety and bad assumptions wore off on me. They swore this thing matches all the IOCs from this flawed Amy rat, and that Nakurs botnet, and they talked so much about the attachment and so passionately about it that I sort of forgot my own processes and procedures, which normally when I look at anything email related, I always start with the message headers to know where it came from. In fact, at BSides Cleveland, I gave one of many places, I gave a talk called Phishing Forensics. Is it just suspicious or is it malicious? And I always start with the headers. The one time I don't, it really came back to bite me. So the road to redemption here, since I verified it did come from our test phishing vendor, it was just a painful lesson just to stick to my standard investigative processes and procedures and not deviate from that. If I had started my investigation by inspecting the message headers first, I could have just closed this out in minutes instead of spending a few hours looking at this. And because it was, essentially a situation we were comfortable with, we didn't require any further technical actions on that. My second scenario here is called security scanner evasion. And what happened here is we had identical phishing mails start hitting inboxes, and we're getting wide-scale reports to the security team of this phishing message coming through. And the page link in our security tools that we use, it looked like it was down. So, it sort of becomes one of these, is the site down? If the site's no longer internet accessible, maybe we don't really have to spend a whole lot of time worrying about this. But this is really about finding out what happened and getting to the bottom of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the email message source code. We're going to note any hyperlinks, and then we're going to check the landing page with our, and I'll have to do a pretend security scanner here, since I don't really have one. We'll look at the landing page source code, and then we'll open the phishing page in a sandbox. just to see what it looked like. So let's go ahead and do those things. Let me go ahead and open up the email here. Let me clear this out. And I'll make this a bit bigger so it's maybe people can see some of it at least. Now the top line, you're not going to see this. This is a demo, so I made some of the stuff up. But I've got from evil.scammer at promisewearelegit.com, and a subject of this link is totally safe, and it's to phishing target, which is unwitting.victim@randomtarget.org. And this is pretty representative of some bad phishing emails that still fools people. Saying, hello, phishing target, we have a really important message for you. To retrieve your message, click here. And that's not real subtle. Regards, spoof sender. But what's surprising is these over-the-top things, they still sometimes work. So let's go ahead and just take a look at the message source code here. And we'll take a look at that hyperlink. I don't actually like to mouse over and on hyperlinks just because I don't always trust that things aren't going to execute JavaScript on mouse over, on hover type of things and execute something. So I tend to be a little cautious. But if I open up the message source code and I look for, it's not going to come up here, why not? So I'm going to do a find, oh, it's down here in the lower, that's why. And I'm just going to look for HTTP, and so sure enough, here's our click here link, and we see where this is actually going. And so here's where I'm going to emulate looking at this in a security scanner tool, just to do some quick analysis on that. We'll go ahead and put that address into the browser that I copied out of the source code. And what we get here is a very generic 404 page. This looks like, hey, this thing is no longer there. It looks like the page is taken down. So maybe this is something we don't need to worry about too much, but maybe it is. So we have the link, but let's go ahead and pull down the source code for the file. And there's a number of ways you can do that. Some of the tools that I like to use are curl, and we'll go ahead and paste that in here, and then I'm going to output that to a file. And I'll just call it unknown.txt, or I'm sorry, HTML. And then another tool I can use is wget. I can also wget that same address, and it'll go ahead and pull down the source code for that file. So now if I do an LSL and look for HTML files. Oops, did I mess something up? Okay. Hold on, let me just see what I got here. Yeah, okay. All right, now. All right, so what we have here, and since this is a localized demo, you might notice that one has a different date, timestamp from today. In real life, these would be pretty close to matching when you executed the commands. This is just simply an artifact of me retrieving the file off of the local file system. But you notice the byte sizes match, and we can also prove that forensically these are really the same values. So if I get the SHA-256 value, we have an exact match. So it doesn't matter if you use curl, wget, or something else. We know forensically this is the same file. So this is something we can look at. We'll go ahead and clear that, and we'll pull this up in a text editor. Make this bigger so it's somewhat more readable. And in this case, what we have is basically a JavaScript file. And what you'll notice is really in the first line of the actual script, it's looking at the user agent. It's looking for Chrome in there. Or the next stanza goes to Edge, Microsoft Edge, Firefox, MSIE, Opera, Safari. What's interesting, though, is at the very end is basically a final else statement, and if it doesn't match one of these things, what it's doing is it's sending it to the fake 404 page. So this is meant to defeat security tools, because unless they're submitting like a real browser user agent string to the server, it's basically purposely directing that traffic to a different page. And so this also tells me that this page is very much alive and well. And sure enough, if we want to take a look at that in our pretend sandbox, what we see is basically a fake Microsoft Office 365, I guess now Microsoft 365 login page. And so this helps the threat actors ensure that real traffic, real browsers, real users are the ones getting to this page as much as they can. So kind of sneaky, really, and also pretty intelligent to avoid getting caught. So just some thoughts on that is we talked about how the evasion code works using the browser user agent string based redirection. In this case, I got really lucky because it was done in JavaScript. Now, if this had been done in a server-side language, like anything from ASP to Ruby, PHP, Python, you name it, I never would have been able to pull the code. I would have been able to tell that a redirect was happening, but I wouldn't necessarily know why. So in this case, I got really lucky. Some other notes about this is, think about this. If the threat actors had a specific browser exploit that only worked against just Firefox as an example, they could target through round robin, checking to see if Firefox users are visiting the site, basically dump them off at the malware page, and then send them over to the real page after the code is executed. And they can make a very targeted approach with that. And digging a little further, if they know only specific versions of Firefox are vulnerable, they could absolutely check for those specific vulnerable versions. This makes this kind of thing really hard to detect and find, because if you don't get it right, then you're basically being sent off to somewhere else. In this case, we were able to figure it out. A little bit of luck there. And honestly, I've seen, there's a lot of ways you can redirect browser traffic, but I think I may have seen that sort of in action before. So anyway, the remediation plan in this case was we determined the actual phishing landing page, and we blocked it through web content filtering. Then we worked with our secure email gateway vendor to block the active phishing campaign. And that was just an example of security scanner evasion that I've seen in the wild. The third scenario I call the rabbit hole. And the premise of this is that I received a request from a user to investigate an email message to determine if it was legitimate or not. And so the email looked fishy at first glance, but was it suspicious, or was it actually malicious? So that's the question I'm trying to answer here. I can tell from the message headers that the source IP address was a mismatch for the sender's domain. So right there is a quick red flag. The email message source code was particularly interesting. In particular, we'll take a look at this, but what you'll see is the link text doesn't match where the actual hyperlink goes. And then the malicious threat actor's objective appears to be credential harvesting for the purposes of account takeover. So let's take a look at some of that. I'll open up the example message here. And the top line, the from, is PayPal support, but the address is ppsupport@pwn-server.org. So we know that's not a PayPal domain, certainly. The subject is PayPal account change confirmation. Now, if I have a PayPal account, particularly if I'm an average user, and I see something like this going, well, I didn't make any changes to my account. What's going on here? Like, that's going to be an attention getter. And so the way the bait works in this type of a phishing email is, we received a request to update your bank account on file. This process will complete in the next 4 hours. If you didn't request these changes to your account, please log in and reject the pending activity. Now, this is going to create a sense of urgency in the average user thinking, oh man, not only did I not make the change, I've only got 4 hours to make sure that this doesn't really happen, and basically prevent, so I think I'm being proactive in preventing getting scammed. The reality is we see a PayPal link, and of course this is a real PayPal login link, so it looks legit just looking at the message. But of course, if we look at the message headers, we're going to find out pretty quick that that's maybe not the case. Let me go into the message source for this one and make this a bit bigger. And I'm going to search for HTTP. And so here what we have at the end is the link we see in the email itself. We've got a legit PayPal address, but the reference is going to a site in .be domain, which is a Belgium domain. And definitely in parameters after that would tell anybody this is definitely not a real PayPal account. So what happens when we look at this in our sandbox to see what this thing looks like? I'll go ahead and paste it in here. Certainly looks like a PayPal login, right? Nothing too crazy there. But of course, we already know just from our analysis up to this point, there's no way this is going to be a legit PayPal account. So using the same technique we did before, let's go ahead and get the origin web file and see if we can understand what's going on here. So I'm going to output this to something called firstpage.html. We have it, and let's go ahead and take a look at that. And try and make this bigger here. Yeah. Well, hopefully, I'll try to explain it as best I can what's going on here. So what we notice is a very small page, like not something we would expect to see when we're visiting a website. But what's interesting here up at the top is we have an HTTP meta refresh, and content equals 0 means 0 seconds. It's going to instantaneously redirect browser traffic to a different web address. Not only is it a different web address, .de, now we're going from Belgium to a German domain. So this is definitely looking sketchy. And it's very interesting that they chose to have a stub page before the actual landing page. In my investigation, I found there were actually several different domains where they had that initial page in case they got taken down, that some of their phishing messages would still kind of get through. So let's understand what's going on here and determine, is this really where we're going? And we're going to do really what we did before, which is look at the source code to understand where this one's going. And again, we know it's now traversing into another country. All right, so I got my second destination here, and then we'll go ahead and output that to second page .html. Oops. And then we will go ahead and open that up in gedit so I can show it. And so what's interesting here is we have a page title, log into your PayPal account. But again, very short page, not what we would expect to see if we were actually where this traffic is going. And what we see here is we have an iframe, and in that iframe is the source going to yet another page. And this one's .nl. So now we've gone from Belgium to Germany to the Netherlands. And it's really a seamless iframe. When you look at the top, you got no margin, no padding. Everything is kind of hidden. So this is really very much a seamless iframe. So maybe visiting this page, they're getting served up another page than the one they're actually visiting. So again, it's another sneaky technique that the threat actors are using to, hide where their actual landing page is, and then also just to make it harder to stop and detect where it's going. If we blocked this secondary page alone, the secondary domain alone, we still wouldn't have everything if they were using multiple domains to do this sort of thing in one sort of landing page of truth. So now that we know that the page is going yet somewhere else, let's take a look at this third destination and see what's going on here. And we'll just, again, kind of go back and get the source for that pretty much the same way we have been doing. So I will curl that address. I'll put that to third page, .html. And what do we get? A bunch of gobbledygook. Very strange. And what we can tell, and now I purposely put in white space here to make this more readable, if you will. And I know some of you are probably thinking that's readable. Not really. But the white space you may not see in real life. In real life, they will just ram this stuff together. It makes it a lot harder to read. But the reason I put the white space in, so you can see very clearly this is JavaScript. You can see it's writing out an unescaped sequence. And then I'm just going to take an educated guess here that this df parenthesis is some sort of a function. And I'm guessing on that. And in the olden days, what we would have to do is we would have to basically unescape that sequence above and then try feeding this function into it to basically interpret what we have. Fortunately, now with modern browsers, we have really good browser developer tools built in. And the important thing to remember is no matter how heavily obfuscated something is when a browser is visiting it, it has to be something that can be decoded for the browser to actually render. Otherwise, we would, threat actors would just be wasting their time. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and fire up our developer tools. Okay, make sure I'm set up where I want. Yeah, that looks good. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the address from our third landing page, not the address that was in here, because remember, this third page is hidden in an iframe, a seamless iframe. Now, if I come back into our developer tools, I should be able to see some stuff. Let me make this bigger, and with this screen, it's still going to be kind of a bit of an eye chart, so unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that in the demo. But if I click on the ellipses here for the body, because we really have very little HTML to actually look at, but if I click on the ellipses and I go into edit as HTML, now I got some stuff I can read. Although, again, here's our basic obfuscated code. But if I keep going, now I get into the real HTML. And some of the things to look at in the source are if I look at this. So I may not understand what this blob is right here, right now, but looking at the stuff that we have, the MIME type up at the top, data image, JPEG, base64, is a very good clue that this is a base64 encoded JPEG image file. And again, if we sort of look through the page, we'll see more HTML stuff. We get to a point where we will... Oh, and you know what? That was the second thing. My apologies. There's actually... another thing I'm not seeing here. You gotta remember to pray to the devil gods. Yeah, I throw caution to the wind. It comes back to bite me sometimes. But yeah, what's really cool here is you can actually see then the decoded unescaped sequence. You can see, well, not in here. All right, this is making me look really bad. Here we go. Okay. This is what I was looking for. All right, so here's all our encoded stuff. We looked at the one for the image, but what's interesting is there's actually more encoded stuff here. So there's something called shortcut icon. The MIME type here is data image, and it's X icon, base64. So it makes me think this might be like a fave icon sort of thing. And, it definitely, proves itself out here. So some of the things to try to understand, what really is this encoded content? We've figured out a much easier shortcut than basically unescaping that function just by using the browser tools. But we want to look at these images and understand what's going on. And again, browser tools can really help us. So if we switch over to the network tab here in Chrome, and then we look at we've got our file stuff here. If I switch over to IMG tab here at the top, here's our one image. And if I click on that, again, we get that same base64 blob that we saw looking at the source. What's really cool is you click over here on Preview tab. And if I can move this out of my way here, I might just have to adjust my zoom. And sure enough, here's PayPal, right? And if you remember, when we go back to the landing page, there's that image file. It's right there. And it's sort of interesting to me that they encoded that inside of there. But if you remember, there was also something else that was part of that. There was another base64 encoded file, and it doesn't show up here in the Images tab. So if we go back to the elements, we can actually grab and copy that. Get that back here again. It takes a while to scroll through this, so bear with me, folks. Alright, so here's our data image, and again, I'm going to make an educated guess here that this is like a fave icon sort of thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this whole blob of stuff. And paste it into, really any text editor you want. And we'll just call it unknown.txt and save that out. So now that we saved out the base64 version of the file, we can actually go ahead and decode that. So if I run base64 and then do a -I to just ignore any warnings it doesn't like, and I go to unknown.txt, and I'm just going to go ahead and redirect that to faveicon.ico. And now if I pop in here, I can take a look in my folder and see that I have faveicon.ico. If I blow this up, because icons are very tiny, you can see, sort of a favorite icon that would look like, something for PayPal potentially. And this is going to be really microscopic, but if you look at the top of the tab window, there is that matching fave icon, very small, but it's there. And so that's how we can use the automated developer tools to decode images for us. And there's also how we can do it by hand. So either method works perfectly fine. And so the encoded content, in this case they use JavaScript encoding to avoid analysis and detection. We've looked at that demo. We've decoded it using the browser developer tools, and then we did it by hand. And just a quick note about the encoded content. Whether the threat actor used encoded elements to avoid analysis and detection, or just they wanted to keep the site as a single page file, they also use base64 encoded elements within their JavaScript encoded page. So we're talking about encoding embedded inside of encoding. Makes it a little bit tricky to unravel that. And again, those are the things that threat actors will do to hide their tracks and keep from getting blocked and stopped. So the remediation plan, we determined the final phishing landing page through all our code analysis, and then we blocked that through content filtering. We also went ahead and blocked the intermediaries since they'd clearly been compromised. We didn't want to leave access to those, especially if the threat actor still seemingly had control of it. We knew that they could potentially go back and try to do that again. And then we went ahead and reported the compromised websites to the domain owners and hosting companies through their Whois contact records. That's a lot harder now than it was then because of the privacy laws have basically anonymized that stuff. So in those cases, you kind of pray that they have that set up correctly in the back end, that their abuse address really does resolve somewhere, and that somebody really is looking at that and taking action on it. But that's it for my demos. I did want to say thank you so much, everybody, for coming into the talk. As you see me here at BSides, come up and chat it up. I'm wearing the green armband, so I'll gladly take hugs or whatever. As you see me, hey, share your own DFIR stories. And friends, Romans, BSides attendees, lend me your IRs. I'll take quick questions if anybody has any. If not, I'll be here all day, so you can always hit me up afterwards. Anyone?
Any questions for Matt?
All right, I don't see any hands, so feel free to hit me up afterwards. Thanks, everybody.